Welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast season finale. I'm your host, Deval Bazi, and we conclude season 8 with an in-depth look at civil action against deep sea mining with ocean defender Dahvia Hylton. Dahvia Hylton is an educator and activist. For over 7 years, she has been a staunch advocate for environmental protection and the rights of women and children, applying an intersectional approach to these issues. Dahvia has served in the first cohort of civil society of the Open Government Partnership and represented the issues of youth and climate on the international stage. Her most recent publication through a team of climate advocates focuses on climate smart development for internal migration and urbanization in Jamaica. She currently serves as the president of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. Hi, Dahvia.
Hi, Darval. Thanks for having me.
We first discussed the controversial issue of deep sea mining on the Climate Conscious podcast in October 2023. Episode 55, Deep Sea Mining, The Big Debate, featuring Khadija Stewart, provided an overview of the sector, the environmental concerns, and the work of the International Seabed Authority, ISA. Today, we'll delve deeper into this controversial issue with Dahvia. So, Dahvia, you have been leading protest action in Jamaica against deep sea mining. So, firstly, please tell us, why are you opposed to deep sea mining?
So many reasons, Darval. It's on the base of it. You can just look at the environmental issue that any form of extractivism, exploitation at this point in the climate disaster is going to harm further what's already been happening. And we've felt the effects, the extreme heat, the dying of our fish population, the effects on our marine environment in particular have been largely ignored because the sea is out there and it's just like not part of our daily lives unless you're somebody who works in the fishery industry or someone who has that connection to the ocean, which we've seen to loss in the Caribbean. So it doesn't seem as if we're in a state of a crisis with the ocean, but we are. It's in a state of collapse already. So imagine with all that's happening, we decide that we're going to mine at the level of the deep sea and a pristine environment that we know nothing about. We know very little about, a percentage of a percentage about. That we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about what's going on in the deep sea, an area that we depend on because it hosts so much life, so much biodiversity. There's so much things that exist there that actually help our lives that we really don't know about because we just don't know enough about the systems down there, how they connect with the rest of the ocean systems and then how it connects with us. There's a lot more to learn. And the question isn't just why I'm against deep sea mining. It's why the majority of scientists are against deep sea mining, why the majority of people who understand marine environments realize that this is a detrimental issue.
You made a very interesting statement, Dahvia, that we know more about the moon than we do about the deep sea. Being from the Caribbean, we can acknowledge that our oceans and our marine ecosystems are essential to our Caribbean identity, our Caribbean communities and economies. We're talking tourism, fisheries, and just our communities that exist largely along our coastlines.
But to add to that, even if you're not someone who lives on the coast or depends on the coast, you are someone who lives on the planet, you breathe air, the ocean provides most of our oxygen. It helps regulate our climate. In a time of climate disaster, that's exactly what we need right now. It's a huge carbon sink. It houses so many biodiverse sea creatures, plants and animals that we also depend on. not just for oxygen production and not just to feed ourselves through the fisheries industry. It's also just part of the system. We have no idea how much each part of the system is connected and how all of that really helps us, but it does.
Absolutely. Now, the International Seabed Authority, ISA, which is headquartered in Jamaica, oversees the regulation of mining activities in international waters. And the Assembly of the ISA has been coordinating the development of a regulatory framework for deep sea mining. Various stakeholders, including environmental groups, scientists, and indigenous groups, have raised environmental, ethical, and economic concerns about deep sea mining. And several countries have even called for a moratorium or a pause on deep sea mining due to the potential for irreversible damage to our oceans and marine biodiversity. However, mining companies are already lining up and making preparations to apply for permission to begin commercial deep sea mining operations. So, deep sea mining, or DSM, is a complex and evolving issue. But tell us, Dahvia, what are some of the latest developments in this sector?
Sure. So recently it was discovered that the polymetallic nodules that they're trying to mine, which are just some rock-shaped, well, they're basically little rocks that have different metals on them, but they also have like biodiversity on it as well. Like some organisms pretty much live on it. It's more than just their home. It's almost part of their formation because of how deep sea creatures are very different from us with how that level of pressure that's down there, their bodies form in different ways, the kind of less skeletal system. So they're formed on those rocks. But we've discovered recently that those rocks itself also produces oxygen through a process called electrolysis. It has a little bit of electricity on it, and then it's able to separate water into oxygen and hydrogen. If you know about electrolysis. So imagine that it's been millions of years that we've been on this earth and we did not know that oxygen is being produced at that level in the dark of the ocean because we thought that the biological processes that oxygen has been produced so far is through plants with sunlight. So we're discovering something this new about our entire existence at this late stage, and they've been trying to mine for over a decade. So imagine that. Imagine how much a delay could help with more discoveries. Another recent change within the meetings as well is that the general secretary or the secretary general, I always get confused with the names, but was previously Michael Lodge, who was very pro mining. He would be, buddy with the heads of the companies that want to mine. He would he would have little like he was at the SIDS conference, SIDS 4 in Antigua, and there were panel discussions about the deep sea mining and how innovative and green it is, fueling the green economy because they're pretending to want to use these for batteries that will fuel renewable energy. So recently he's been ousted as the Secretary General, and now in his place is the this lovely lady from Brazil, an oceanographer who actually knows the impact of what she's doing. Leticia, she knows more about the ocean. So far, it's been like a lot of business people talking in the meetings about, the technicalities of mining, the financial aspects of dividing up the ocean by countries, as opposed to what it really should be about, which is about the ocean, the environment of the ocean, the cultural connection to the ocean, the tangible and intangible things that we'd be losing through mining. We can't have an environmental impact assessment without any consideration for the environment. If our priorities are fueled in moneyed interests, then the takeaway that we always have from these studies will always be that. So ironically, them finding out about the oxygen through the nodules that they want to mine was something that was discovered by the metals company as they are trying to explore, they're at the exploration phase for mining.
Well, that's another clear example of greenwashing. Imagine trying to paint an activity that has the potential to disrupt marine ecosystems as a driver for the green revolution.
Wow. It really is insane. The more you say it, it's so crazy.
So we know that the ISA, as I mentioned, is headquartered in Jamaica, and that's also where you are located. What have you observed to be the Caribbean's response, both at a national and at a regional level, to deep sea mining?
So I know more about Jamaica's response because Jamaica is the host country, and as a youth group or a climate group in Jamaica, we have been petitioning the government. We wrote written open letters. We've had meetings with government bodies and ministers and senators about it. So I'm very familiar with our position. For the rest of the Caribbean, it's a lot more difficult to say because a lot of these meetings aren't fully attended. A lot of delegates, a lot of sponsoring states that have signed on to the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, which means that you have a vote on whether or not to mine deep sea. But the thing is, you have to be present at the meetings to vote. They don't count the online votes. So we don't have a huge presence for Caribbean governments in that meeting. Bahamas and Barbados just recently got a delegation to come to those meetings. So I'm hoping they haven't made their stance clear yet. I'm hoping that they'll do that soon and that their stance will have some consideration for the environment and the cultural impact and the socioeconomic impact. Um, so we'll see that as time goes on, and we'll continue to pressure them to make their stance known. And hopefully anyone listening to this can also try to do the same for their own countries. So the Jamaica position that we are familiar with now is that they are saying they responded to our letter to say that they are cautious about mining and they won't go ahead to mine without the necessary information, the data, or the necessary precautions, rather. They didn't actually mention the data now that I think about it. It's more of trying to come up with the necessary precautions to ensure safety. But we've noted that there's no way to do that without the data. And we won't have the data for another 20, 30 years. So while they're saying this sort of statement that's vague and seems as if they are being cautious and they care, we know that they've signed on to mine with a company called the Blue Minerals Jamaica. And the only way for a company to mine in the deep sea is to get a sponsoring state of the ISA, which is a country that signed on to the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, which is really meant to protect our ocean. But instead, they're using it in a way to just divide up the ocean between different countries and get those resources, try to make funds. How do I even explain the depth of it? The ISA has sort of put a preferential treatment toward or preferential financial consideration towards small island developing states, states like ours, in saying that they believe that companies should be able well, companies that are looking for member states should first try to look for small island developing states that haven't had a chance on the global scale in terms of industry. And so countries like ours are now saying, okay, this is our chance to get our GDP up. It's our chance to become leaders of an industry. And so we're gonna do it because we've never had a chance to, get our foot in the gate before, be the first in an extractive industry, in a large major industry like this. But so it sounds really beautiful. Like it sounds like, oh, we're taking into consideration all these things that the environmentalists have been talking about for small and developing states, countries that don't have as much impact on climate change get a chance to now make financial benefit. But then what it really actually amounts to is just targeting countries that don't have much of a way to say no when a company comes with this big investment into something that really won't benefit us. Even like the amount that they're propagating to give us is like a fee. It's a fee to have permission to use the deep sea because the deep sea doesn't belong to any country, any one country. So that's why a member state is necessary for a company to then mine. Um, so what they're paying us is a fee for that. They're not paying us any royalties on the nodules. That goes to the ISA. Then the companies themselves recuperate their, investment in those heavy machinery, and then they recuperate their profits. And what the countries are left with is a small amount that cannot cover what the environmental effects will be. And we know this because we've seen it with industry time and time again. Every time an industry comes into the country, bauxite mining in Jamaica, even the clothing industry in Jamaica, tourism in all over the Caribbean, companies come in, they recoup their profits, and then if there's any sort of environmental effect, there's just not enough to go around to fix it or help with that problem. Not enough that would replace what the environment provided for us in terms of protection from disaster, in terms of our livelihoods and our lives. And then when things get really rough, they get to pack up and leave. And the country, the host country in this case, would be the one to feel the losses.
Wow, it's so unfortunate that even in 2024, the legacy of exploitation and extractivism continues in our region. And we know that with a short-sighted approach or a one-sided approach to development in favor of economic growth, we're sacrificing the health of our environment, our ecosystems, and the sustainability for future generations in order to raise GDP.
I would also argue, is it development at all if it's not sustainable? So if you destroy a mangrove area for a hotel and you get that GDP increase for that short period of time, and then a hurricane comes, or even without the hurricane, the marine environment there starts to die off. And years down the line, you see that the fisheries industry, people have to pack up and leave that area. So then it's just the only locals that are able to live there are people who are working for the hotels or people trying to do menial jobs or stuff like that, which really doesn't have enough. It really doesn't pay enough, the same hotels that are destroying the environment. So then they start to, either steal or whatever they need to do to survive, live off the land in terms of capture land and stuff like that, which the government, it would seem, encourages, because I live in a tourist area where that's happening, where a government entity, a parliamentarian said that once it's government land, just go, it's yours. So people have captured land and have been living in sort of squalor, no form of water systems, waste management, even solid waste management. Sorry, not solid waste, liquid waste. They have been able to, find a way around that. So it's what the community used to be versus what it is now. And you call that development at all just because of a little bit of a GDP increase. I wouldn't even classify it as development, if I'm being honest. I'd classify it as destruction.
I completely agree. It seems as though we are taking backward steps. And especially in this era of climate change, we should be seeking to protect and conserve our natural ecosystems, which form part of our natural defenses to the impacts of climate change. So we know that civil action plays a significant role in environmental activism, influencing public opinion and policy. And as I mentioned, you and your organization, you've been actively leading protest action, advocating against deep sea mining. How have the recent protests outside of the conference center been impacting the deep sea mining discussions? And what do you hope to achieve through these actions?
2 years ago, when we were notified about what's happening and we decided to start protesting, those meetings were closed. No civil society was allowed in those meetings at that time. They claimed that the issue was that the Jamaica Conference Center, where the ISA is headquartered, that was under construction. So they had their meetings at a hotel. And so there was limited space and they only allowed for delegates of countries. So we had no say what was going on in those meetings. They acted as if they were being transparent by allowing an online stream of those meetings, which is still available every time they have those meetings. It's online. You can stream it on their site. The problem is that at any time, that online stream can go down, which happened several times, and there's no way of knowing if it was on purpose or if it was by technical issues. So they even now that they have since started allowing civil society in through a lengthy process, if you're able or willing to apply, even now sometimes they'll ask civil society to leave the room as they make certain decisions, which happened last July, July before this one, when they wanted to discuss something pertaining to civil society, they asked civil society to leave the room. Um, so it's not transparent. They're only pretending. And then if you wanted true transparency, there would be a lot more information out about deep sea mining. When we started talking about it, there was just no response. No one knew what we were talking about. Even we did not know before it was brought to us. So it's a thing of um everyone needing to know what's happening about our world that we live in, nothing about us without us, because it's going to affect us. This is our planet, this is our home. So there's no way that you can have these decisions without civil society, and there's no way inside the room and outside the room, by the way. Like, people need to know, the majority of people need to know. And so that's why we show up to our protests, because one, we need those inside the room to understand that their voices alone can't matter on this. It can't be the only ones that matter on this. They're not the smartest, the best, whatever they think they are to be the ones to make this decision. And they're definitely not the most affected, because they're the countries that aren't, like us on the coast, constantly being the first to experience everything from climate change, first and worst, when we really don't have any much contribution to climate change. So yes, they're not the ones being affected. They're not the ones that have to have the say all the time, which means that people have to be outside protesting, letting them know that. The protest itself has garnered attention. We've been in the Gleaner, TVJ, CVM, all the major news outlet, Loop News always comes and tries to understand, because that's the media's job to let people know something like this happened, and no one, when they signed on with a company to mine, no one knew, not even climate change civil society groups knew about it. It was just a single newspaper article after it was signed. Even now, we don't have access to the contract that was signed, so we don't even know what benefits we're getting from it, if they do decide to mine, and how liable we are to what happens after mining. In case anything happens in a country, say in the Pacific, where they want to mine, decides that this company did this, and now I need to sue because what's happening is egregious and affecting us. And the company has signed on with Jamaica. The company is not liable at all. Jamaica is liable. That's why the sponsoring states exist, because it's the countries deciding to mine with a company. A company on its own cannot mine the deep sea. So it's why we need to be out there, why we need to hear people, why we need to hear our voices, because it's the taxpayers' money that's going to be used in that liability that we're talking about. So we have to be there for any amount of any level that you can think of it on. We have to be there. Now, what's the impact that we've been having so far? I think at the beginning of the meetings, when it was closed door, it's opened, now that it's been opened up a little bit more, there's been a lot more discussions about the intangible and tangible systems that, or benefits that the ocean provide. There's been a lot more talk about the cultural connection to our ocean. There's been a lot more talk about the environmental effects and consideration for the deep sea environment as a whole, not just as how it affects us, but as itself. It deserves to exist as itself, because it's been there before we were born, and it should be there after, and it should be there for the generations that to come. Talking about generational equity, so the types of conversations in those meetings have changed from when it began, technical meetings about how to mine and how to divide up the ocean, to now considerations on if you should mine and what impact that could be and why it's important to every single living being on the planet. So we can't take credit for all of the conversation changes. Obviously, having civil society inside has been very helpful. The thing is that we need both. We need people on the inside making these points, being able to speak up, and make interventions and even side events of their own where they host their own event and teach those delegates, because you cannot assume that delegates, just because they have the power to vote, they have all the knowledge in the world. They really don't. They're not ocean scientists. They're just government officials who rely on civil society, scientists, everyone else to inform their opinion. And that's where the vote is supposed to come from. We elect these people, or these people are chosen by our electors. And I think they need to remember that, which is what protesting is about. So our aim is to let that and that be known and that be remembered. If this were happening in any other country, if any other country was the host country that had like more of a robust, protest culture, then you'd see thousands of people lined up outside to know that this is not right. You've seen it happen in places like Paris, America, when people protest for Palestine, absolutely necessary and needed. Um, Countries where injustice happens and they don't let it slide. You've seen that sort of response in protesting, but in the Caribbean, it's more like injustice is just every day. And it's almost too much sometimes. Like we live hard lives and we have to focus on or regular lives, we have to focus on this. We can't be out there in the hot sun. It's a lot. I understand what people are, because it's during the workday as well, the meetings for the ISA, and it was every 3 months. We had to be gathering and trying to get people to come out and protest. It was a lot, but now they're slowing down a little bit. That's another change we could talk about. They're slowing down a little bit, so they don't have another meeting for November. Their next meeting will be March and then July again. So it's helping a little. They're slowing down. They're realizing that they can't just push this thing ahead like they were trying to do, push it ahead in secret for 2 years before we started really getting on to them. Well, for decades, really. They've been trying to push it in secret. No one knew about it. So the faster they could get it out, the better for them. Now they have to slow down, not just because of our voices, but also because it's financially not sustainable for countries to be flying out to Jamaica every 3 months. Climate-wise, that alone, it has an impact. So things are changing slowly, very slowly. Now we are at 32 countries that have called for either a moratorium, which is like a long pause where we try to get the data, which again could take 20 to 30 years. Or some people have asked for a precautionary pause, which is a little shorter of a pause, but enough to make the regulations. But obviously, without the data, how can you make proper regulations? And then one country has called for a full ban, which is France.
Well, Davia, leading civil action against government and private interests requires courage, dedication, strategy, and resilience. So I definitely do commend your efforts, you and your team, in pushing for greater transparency and information sharing and really seeking the interests of Jamaica and by extension, the other small island developing states in our region. The work that you're doing is so important in terms of bridging grassroots movements with policy making and ensuring that there is the participatory approach to development where a wide range of stakeholders have access to these decision-making spaces or they have access to information. I don't know, maybe it's because we live in a time of multiple crises happening at the same time. You can get a bit burnt out keeping up with all the issues, climate, health, economic, geopolitical, but this is something that we need to keep our eyes on, having our voices heard to influence public opinion and policy, and also apply pressure to our leaders to make the right decisions.
Exactly that.
So, with that being said, what key issues, actions, or activities would you want the public to pay close attention to when it comes to deep sea mining?
Okay, so wherever you are as you're listening to this, your actions could be different. So if you're living in Jamaica, you're a Jamaican. We've already reached out to all the, possible politicians about it and gotten their stance. So the next step is just to keep pressuring them to make the right decision and letting them know that even though they've signed onto a contract with a mining company, they can still vote no or for a pause on deep sea mining, and that's not a breach of your contract. Of course, they also need to open up the contract for us to see to make sure, but really, the vote is separate from the contract as far as everything that we've been able to see and understand. So the real work that needs to be done is to pressure those governing bodies. If you're living in any other part of the Caribbean and your country has not made their stance known as yet, they also haven't signed on to any other just to mine the deep sea with any company. As far as I know, it's only Jamaica as a Caribbean nation that's done that. So you have the chance as Caribbean citizens to then, or citizens of your country in the Caribbean, to now call that out before it ever happens. Make sure that they know that this is not something you can do under the secret like they did with us. It's something that we know about now, so we can oppose it. You have to make considerations for us when you're making decisions for the country. So wherever you are, if there you can check online, but more than likely there isn't. So if there isn't a letter, an open letter to your prime minister or head of state, that's what we started out with. Well, one of the things we started out with was an open letter to the prime minister, and that's how we got our response on their stance from Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, who let us know that they're trying to take the precautionary approach, quote unquote, which really didn't amount to anything, seeing that they've already signed on to with a company. Um, then we were able to secure a meeting with Senator Fraser Binns, who is the opposition, but she has, kind of championed the cause and championed environmental issues and got us in a meeting with the leader of the opposition as well, who is more on the side of caring for the natural environment, or at least trying to understand what is happening with our natural environment. So he had a meeting with various climate change groups, including our own, where we're able to explain deep sea mining. And other groups as well were there that were able to explain the issues that we're seeing on the climate change that needs to be addressed right now, and we can't possibly manage to exacerbate at this point in time. We talked about the coral reefs in Jamaica that have died off. 98% of our coral reefs have died off. So we are at a time of collapse in our natural ecosystems, but particularly our marine ecosystems. So those are the things that we did, and we're hoping that other Caribbean countries can start to do that with their own governments. And I'm of course available to have meetings with your groups about deep sea mining. If you're willing to reach out, you can follow our pages. Or Footprint JA is the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to reach out to me directly, I mean, I'll see those anyway now that I'm coming into the position of president, but you can also follow one of the Planeteers. That's my personal social media that I've been, also talking about deep sea mining on. So it starts with education. I know sharing the social media doesn't seem like it's important, but it starts with education. It starts with knowing what's happening to your own country, what's happening to your world, what decisions your country is making. And then to go on to reach out to those people. Letters to the editor are helpful as well. Open letter to your head of state. Keep trying calling for meetings with them. We had a meeting with Senator Matthew Samud as well, who is more directly related to the deep sea mining vote. And it was a little bit of a discouraging meeting, but at least we were able to get our points across. The consensus seems to be that the horse is through the gate with deep sea mining. So they just want to make sure that Jamaica gets their coin and is able to profit from something that they think is already going to happen. But the truth is, it's such an unprecedented industry that there's no guarantee of anything. And the more we talk, the more we push, the more we pressure the politicians, the more we can stop it. So the goal is to stop it before it starts, because once it starts, there's no real stopping it. There's no real knowing what will happen next because we don't know enough about the marine environment, but also because we don't know what their long-term plans are. Right now, they're at the exploration phase. They're aiming to mine at the Pacific Ocean, a region called Clarion-Clipperton Zone. But once mining starts, they can greenlight any other location. Even now, your own country can decide to mine in your own economic zone. So outside of the deep sea, which is owned by no one, each country has their own little area larger than the country itself out in the ocean that they can also try to mine. So it's being vigilant about all of it because it could be anything, anywhere, at any time, and the impacts will be astronomical.
The precautionary approach, it sounds nice and it's politically correct, I guess. But when you think about the increasing vulnerability of the Caribbean to climate change, I mean, we just experienced Hurricane Beryl, the loss of biodiversity, and the collapse of our marine ecosystems. We should be proactive and direct and definitively object deep sea mining.
Absolutely.
So I really want to commend you and thank you. And I'm so happy to have this conversation with you because we definitely need more public education on this issue. And we need more hands on deck, more voices in terms of advocacy and activism, and really lobbying our leaders to, get their act together. Whatever decisions they are making has to be aligned with sustainable development and climate resilience and protecting our biodiversity.
Right. That's exactly it.
Yes. So as we wrap up today's episode, I would love for you to share, what's next on your agenda in terms of your activism.
Sure. So we have a little bit more time now before the next set of meetings, so we don't have to rush and try to get people together to protest. So we're going to take it a little bit slower and go back to the beginning to look at our connection to the ocean, which is a little bit lacking. So we're going to launch an ocean campaign, Planet Ocean, because we call it Planet Earth, but it's majority ocean on the planet. So it is Planet Ocean, and we need to connect with what's happening in our oceans. Deep sea mining is not the only threat. Sand mining also happens regularly in the Caribbean. We don't even have access to our beaches because of tourism and several other political and policy issues. Overfishing also happens. Deep trawl fishing, the types of unsustainable methods that have been used that have been destroying our ecosystems. The coral reef death has been solely based off of heat. So global warming is it's not going to get cooler right now. We're not doing anything to make it cooler. So they're going to continue to die out, and we have to figure out how to make these survivals, continue to propagate. So the amount of threats the ocean faces, our next step is to try to focus on how we can get people to understand how important the ocean is, because they're just not connecting as yet. So when we show up to our protest, it's just a handful of people. We want it to be 1,000 strong. We want it to be such a discussion in the environment in general and the ocean specifically to be such a huge point of discussion for people that it becomes a voting issue, that a politician cannot even think of trying to enter office without knowing everything that they need to know about what's happening to our environment and how it's affecting us, and what policies and stuff they're going to put in place for us, and how they talk to us about it. It can't just be every time there's an election, they want to give out $1,000 and you vote for them or something. It has to be, what are you doing to secure our future? Because this is our future. This is literally it. The moment, this is the turning point. And it's been building towards this turning point, and we have to do just as equal work to unbuild all of that stuff that they've been putting into our ecosystems for generations and generations. So this is a voting year for Jamaica. I want to see people get it on the top of their heads that there's no vote for anything other than our future right now.
Absolutely. So I'm calling on all my Jamaican listeners to connect with Dahvia and show up and show out for the next protest action.
If you are not able to show up in person to our protest in either March or July, then know that we started an online protest system this year where you can do a chant, put up a sign, show your connection to the ocean, do any little thing, play dress up, do whatever you need to do to make it known that you're against deep sea mining and you care about our ocean and our future.
Thank you for journeying with us through another season of the Climate Conscious podcast as we explore climate action and sustainable development from the Caribbean perspective. If the podcast has been useful, please leave us a rating or review on your favorite app. Connect with the Climate Conscious on LinkedIn or Instagram. And stay tuned for season 9.